We'll hear more from her as we go along today. We want to welcome all of you. We couldn't let Rabbit Holes die last year. We had to rename it, but we've kept it going. And this is the first one. This year we'll only have 2 this year. The next one will be in September. So we're glad you came. We're trying this new format on a Sunday afternoon, which on a beautiful April day, even if it's a little blustery, it's hard sometimes to get people to come in, but we appreciate all of you coming. This is a joint venture between KAFM Community Radio and the Western Colorado Writers Forum. We've done it for the last 2 years, along with some other programs that we do with them. And we hope that you'll get involved with one entity or the other. If any of this turns you on at all, we'd love to have you. We're also funded in part by the Grand Junction Commission on Arts and Culture, who provides grant money. We do pay our speakers to come. It isn't much, but it's better than nothing, hopefully. And we appreciate them giving of their time to come do this for us. I didn't have to twist their arms at all, which was great. And I appreciate that. A couple of things I want to tell you about. The Writers Forum puts on free monthly workshops at the Art Center. Our next one will be on grammar. And if you are also always wondering, you know, where the commas go and all that fun stuff, Jennifer Hancock from the college will be putting that on. That will be May 7th, which is a Tuesday night from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Grand Junction Art Center. We also have a special poetry workshop coming up that same week, that Saturday. It'll be much more in-depth, much more intimate with Jody Hollander. She's a poet out of Vail who's won many awards. It would be a lot of fun, I think. There is a charge for that. It's $20 for members of the Writers Forum and $30 if you're not. If you go to our website at www.westernColoradoWriters.org, it has all the information for these events on it. So we welcome you to any of our programming. We'll welcome you in September if you feel like you want to come back for Wings for the Earthbound. That phrase was taken from a poem by Rosemary Watola Tromer out of Placerville. She will be one of the featured performers in September, along with Uche Obuji, who's a Nigerian poet out of Denver. And we hope Tony Babbitt, I haven't gotten a confirmation from him yet, a flute player and maker. So they'll be our guests in September. So put the word out. We are videotaping this, which is a first for us. We want to welcome Ethan, who's helping us with that. Hopefully this will be posted both on our website eventually if we figure out how. and KFM has talked about possibly posting it on their website. So we hope to let you know about that once we get that figured out. I'm going to introduce our guests, and there's an open mic. Thank you, Virginia. This is Virginia Jensen, who does all our newsletters and all that fun stuff. We do have an open mic afterwards if you're interested in performing at some time during the course of things. We will have a couple breaks. You can come up and let her know and she'll put you on the list. So there is wine and other things for sale in the back. We're pretty free form. If you want to get up and, you know, during the program and get that, you may. There'll be a little break in between each as we go from speaker to speaker. And there'll be a break between when these all tell us about their work and then the panel discussion that will be the last half of the program. So this first half will be each artist talking about their art and various other things that they've chosen to speak about. And so it'll be quite varied, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it won't mess up the order of things. I'm not used to emceeing. Okay. I want to introduce first Dr. Luis Lopez. He is a professor emeritus from Colorado Mesa University, where he taught English, Latin, ancient Greek, and mythology. He directed the academic honors program. Before coming to Grand Junction, he taught in the Albuquerque Public Schools and the honors program at the University of New Mexico. He has an MA from St. John's College in Santa Fe, PhD in medieval and Anglo-Saxon literature from the University of New Mexico, and Luis was also the owner of the Farolito Press. He's published 5 books of poetry. Each Month I Sing received the National Book Award in 2008. He is a visual artist working in Spanish colonial tin work, And if you have time, you might tell us the difference between Spanish and Mexican. Didn't work. I'd be curious about that. His present passion is working on juniper root sculptures. He did have a handout. If you didn't get one, let us know. We'll get one to you for his part of the presentation. So go for it, Luis.
Is this on?
Yeah.
All right, great. First success, the microphone is on. I'm going to start by just telling you that it's very weird that I am a person who is influenced by Anglo-Saxon literature and the language, you know, and medieval literature. So that's why I chose those areas to go into. And so you're going to learn some tonight too, especially pronunciation, and then you're going to learn. The object tonight is to show you, to lead you to my writing of one poem in Anglo-Saxon form, and then to lead you to the writing of a story poem, because story poems, you know, sagas and stuff like that are fantastic in that language. So, how many of you have had a course in Anglo-Saxon literature? Any of you? All right. So, I'll probably get you to read it then. All right, if you'll turn to the second page, I want to show you some pronunciations because you're going to be involved with pronunciation. That's okay now?
Yes.
All right. On page 2, at the bottom of that paragraph, you have something that looks like a P with a flag on it, and a D with a little cross on top of it. Those are voiced and unvoiced THs, so they're pronounced the or the. So that's what those are. And they appear everywhere. And don't ask me what the difference is in pronunciation for each one, even though they look different, because there's none. And then the AE, the AE is written together, and that's an A sound, A. So that's all you really need to know for going into pronouncing. So now we're going to go to page 1, front page. This is the beginning of Beowulf. Beowulf has 1,300 lines, not 13,000, 1,300 lines. And in my studies, I had to translate every single word in every single line. And that is something to have to do. And I have the book down here to prove that I had to do that. So what I have here is the beginning paragraph, 3 lines, and then a translation of it, which is my translation when I first took this course. All right, so I want you to repeat after me as I say it. What.
What.
We Gardena.
We Gardena.
Inyer Dagum.
Inyer Dagum.
Theochininga.
Theochininga.
Thrym Yefrunon.
Thrym Yefrunon.
Hada Atalingas.
Hada Atalingas.
Ellen Fremedon.
Ellen Fremedon.
And what you just said in translation is, listen, we of the Spiridanes in younger days, of people kings, strength you have heard of, how the prince brave deeds performed. That's the translation, but that's not what you would write if you're going to turn it in as a translation. So on the next page, then I do have a little introduction to what this is. I'm just going to read it. Old English poetry was composed in a flexible type of 4-stressed alliterative line consisting of 2 half lines of 2 stresses each. And if you look over on the next page, page 3, down at the bottom, that's a good example of how the line is split in 2. So you have a river running down the middle of the writing. You need to know, though, that when people first saw the Beowulf and other works like it, it was written in prose form. And the writers, the poets, knew how to divide it. And then so what we have now are the poetic divisions of the lines. All right, back to my reading. The stressed syllables established the rhythm, and the two half lines were bound into a unit by the convention of alliteration. Alliteration, repetition of the consonants. I don't have this in here, but the assonance is also involved in it, the repetition of the vowel sounds. Variations in the relative positions of stresses within the line and the convention of subordinate stresses produce delicate and subtle currents of mutation and change in rhythm. The recitation of this alliterative verse usually accompanied chords struck on a harp. All right, so it was beautiful to listen to. And so now we're going to go to page 3 again, and these are a few lines, lines 791 to 821. You all know who Grendel is? Grendel, who was killed by Beowulf, and this is a section from that. So what I'm going to do is read it in Anglo-Saxon, and then I need a volunteer to read it in English. Volunteer? My wife, okay. Okay. Nolde eorla cleo anige finga bone quel cuman quicne for Latin ne his lithagas leora engum nite tealde.
The noble warrior would not allow his evil guests to leave. He was convinced that the victim's thing should quickly be killed. Oh, that the vicious thing should quickly be killed.
Speaking of Grendel.
Yes.
Guthvila nan gretan nolde he sig wap nun forsvaren hafte egga gehildere skolde his aldorgega on them gage thesis lethus.
No sword on earth, not even the finest, could kill him, for he had cast a spell to blunt all blades. But he was doomed to be slain that night.
Akine se modega mag higilases hafte vehonda was gewaspether orthum. Defende la lexa yebat ato aglaika him on eakle werth syndol sweatol se oneway on sprugnon burston van lokan beo wer guthred jefithe skolde grendel thonan foresiok fleon under ben Cleotha Sakon Wileas Wick.
Beowulf, that bold-hearted man, held his arm fast. Hateful to teach was the life of the other. That loathsome thing felt a pain flesh. A huge wound gaped in his shoulder. Sinews split, and muscles burst from the bone. The victory was granted to Beowulf. Grendel fled with mortal wound under the moor, hills to his joyless den.
And so Beowulf then takes the arm he's ripped off and hangs it from the rafters. But now he has another problem. The other problem is his mother, Grendel's mother. He has to go kill her too. So, and that's the main part of the story. And if you all saw the movie, it wasn't very good. You should read the Beowulf better. All right. On page 5 is a poem I wrote about my exam in Beowulf. I had a teacher who was really tough. I call her Dr. Ellen Curran here, but she was actually Dr. Ellen Spolsky. She was tough. 13 of us started the class in Anglo-Saxon. It was the actual Beowulf. 3 of us ended up finishing it. That was pretty tough. And luckily, the people who actually finished it, we had language before, so I had Greek and Latin already, and Spanish. So that helped me a lot. The others who had no language, they said, no way, I'm out of here. Yeah. So I wrote this, well, I'll read it to you. This is a poem I wrote using Ellen Curran, I call her, as the narrator. Luis, I sit here sullen in my study, watch it snow outside my window. Big, beautiful, fluffy flakes, cup of coffee, creamy, steaming on my desk, next to a double pile of bulky Beowulf papers bent to grade, both piles by 2. But yours sits open before me. I sip my coffee, swallow slowly, then pencil poised drop point to paper where I write, not all snow falls outside my window. She had that kind of humor. C minus. So you can see that that really worked hard at the repetition, the alliteration, the essays, and I sit here sullen and study. That's the first 2 parts. The first line has 2 parts, but you have the S's appearing in the first part and in the last part, 2 and 1. Then you have watch it snow outside my window. There I'm really working not so much with the alliteration as with the assonance, the snow and the window. But then there is the W in both sides. Big, beautiful, that's obvious. Fluffy flakes is obvious. Cup of coffee is obvious. Creamy, steaming, there you're working with the consonants, but you're also working with the assonants here too. And then on my desk, next to a double, the D sounds, pile of bulky Beowulf papers. The P's and the B's and the P's are often put together because they're what we call plosives. Those would be in study language. It's called a plosive. Bent to grade, both piles by 2. And then, but yours sits open before me. I sip my coffee, swallow slowly, then pencil poised, drop point to paper where I write, not all snow falls outside my window. All right, so that ended up being a poem that I wrote inspired by the Anglo-Saxon sounds. If you look at page 6 now, I just thought I'd put in a page that has to do with the different kinds of Anglo-Saxon poetry there is. So you have the most famous poem is the Beowulf, obviously. It's one of them they call a battle poem, killing of the Grendel's mother and the dragon. But then you have other kinds of poems. You have elegies and dramatic lyrics. Some of you may have read The Seafarer, Noah's Flood, perhaps, in college or in high school. Riddles, those are my favorite, the riddles, and nomic verse. A riddle, I'll give you an example of one at the end of the paper here as a little gift about a moth. And then I have religious allegory. The whale is an allegory. I'm going to use that in a minute. Old Testament material, apocryphal, Genesis, Exodus, fallen angels, fall of man. Those are really great works. They take a while to get through, but they're worthwhile to see what angle the writers take. We don't know the writers very well at all. However, we do know Cinewolf, who is a writer. He wrote a lot of stuff. Advent Lyrics, Dream of the Rood, The Last Judgment. He just wrote so much. And there's another person I didn't put in here. His name is Caedmon, you may have heard of, C-A-E-D-M-O-N. He is very, very famous. He wrote an awful lot, but we only have 9 lines of his work, that's all. But there's a lot of historical stuff that says he existed and that he wrote. and then there are a lot of historical battles. All right, I have 2 page 6s, don't ask me why. Now the whale is an allegory, and this leads to another one of my writings, which appears in the book that won the National Award, the American Book Award. This is called The Whale, and it's a religious allegory. And there are a lot of poems like this that are written to explain how one should live and how one should act in life. So I find this one very interesting because there is also a Greek story that looks just like this, but there is not a whale, it's a turtle. So the sailors end up not on top of a whale thinking it's an island, but on top of a turtle thinking it's an island. And when I was, it was actually middle school, it was after the end of the Second World War. I was still in elementary school. A lot of my neighbors were coming home from the war. Many of them were sailors. And they would come home from the war and they would tell me stories, not about battles and not about, their fighting and that. They stayed away from that, talking about those kinds of things. But they told me stories that they knew, and especially those sailors who were out on the ocean, they had beautiful stories. And that's what this one is going to be about, the one I wrote. So here is the Old English one. There they encamp, the sea-weary sailors. Fearing no danger, they kindle a fire high on the island. The hot flames blaze, and joy returns to travel-worn hearts eager for rest. Then, crafty in evil, when the whale feels the sailors are fully set and finally lodged, enjoying fair weather, suddenly with his prey, ocean's guest plunges down in the salt wave, seeking the depth in the hall of death, drowning sailors and ships.
Oh.
That's sad, isn't it? Oh, God. But then that led to this poem. And this was an actual story told to me by one of the sailors. It's going to be hard to see the last line of the first column, but if you want to bring it down, we'll get to that. And my method of writing, especially in this, is like the Old English, but it's ta, 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 as the story is being told to me, and I write it down. So, aquí estoy means here I am. Story 1. Teofilo Trujillo, proud sailor, U.S. Navy, World War II, told us kids story after story about the ocean, not the war, about creatures that live there, like this one. Captain said, Teofilo, take 6 sailors, the skiff, check that little island, but careful, sea monsters, many kinds, you never know where. We land, island, full of broken wood, ship stuff everywhere. Hungry, we use the wood, make a cooking fire, eat. Suddenly the island rises, up, 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 my mate sliding down one side, me the other toward the skiff. I grab it, my mate yelling, screaming, being eaten. I get in, pull away, see the island disappear. A giant whale takes its place, one leg sticking out of its mouth. Aquí estoy, here I am, Teofilo Trujillo, sailor, here to tell you that's what happened. And that's how they told the story. And I loved the story. I was enthralled by it. Huh? Yeah. And then I added another one here, and another one told me, and I know this appears somewhere, but I don't know where. I think it's Greek. But he told me this story. Aquí estoy, here I am, story 2. The destroyer would not move forward, backward, right, left. A calm sea, stormy sea, mobile, rooted to this place. Captain said, Teofilo, get in the water, see what's holding the ship. The anchor is up, but something is holding us. I put on my gear, get in, stay close to the ship so the waves don't toss me. Look around, front, sides, bottom, and then back where I see a little fish, 6 inches, with his teeth biting a tiny part of the rudder. That's what's holding the ship. So still, the tiny fish holding it, frozen. Then it lets go. The ship tosses up, down, right, left with me. Then it bites the rudder again. The ship freezes. The storm blows over and I am pulled up to tell my story. The captain says, get back in the water, get the fish. I get it with a little net, but I can't move it up or down or away from the ship, even though it has let go of the rudder. Aquí estoy, here I am, Teofilo Trujillo, sailor, here to tell you more of what happened. So those are nice stories to learn as a kid and then be able to write about them. And then finally I added a riddle at the end. I'm going to read it in Anglo-Saxon, and then you'll understand it. Vote word prat me that fute. Redliu weer dat ik dat onder gevragen. That se weer for swalg. That word means swallowed, for swalg. Where gees sumes veoff thistro three fatna quide on das strangan stachel stalgeis ne was quide the gloyava he them wordum swalg. A moth ate a word. To me it seemed a marvelous thing when I learned the wonder that a worm had swallowed, in darkness stolen, the song of a man, his glorious sayings, a great man's strength, and the thieving guest was no whit the wiser for the word he ate. Thank you so much. You have Brenda on the back. Seamus Haynes' Beowulf. It's a very good translation, and I had the pleasure of having him help me with my poetry at Harvard. He was a wonderful help. You all know Seamus Haynes' work, don't you? He's just an amazing person. So you didn't get to meet him, did you, Maggie?
No.
No. But he's dead now, so you can't ever meet him.
Luis did bring some of his books up here. He didn't bring any to sell, but if you want some, I'm sure you could work out something with him to get them somehow or another. So, thank you, Luis. Next is Dr. Jack Gilmore. He is an emeriti professor of music from Colorado Mesa University, where he taught private voice, diction, vocal literature, vocal pedagogy, I can never say that word, music history, music theater history, male choir, and directed many musicals, operettas, and operas during his 28-year tenure. If you've attended the shows at CMU over the years, chances are you've seen one of the productions he directed. My Fair Lady, She Loves Me, Assassins, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Mikado, Pirates of Penzance, twice, The Medium, Noah's Flood, Amal and the Night Visitors, Guys and Dolls, Jesus Christ Superstar, to name a few. As head of voice, he oversaw hundreds of vocal recitals and is very proud to say that he personally coached and prepared over 55 students for the vital capstone musical event. No small achievement, each recital represents 2 to 4 years of instruction and coaching for each student in a recital. During his tenure at CMU and MCS, he was also chair and co-chair of the Lecture and Forums Committee for over 12 years and funded literally hundreds of campus-wide events and oversaw them. Dr. Delmar has also been a frequent soloist with the Grand Junction Symphony, Western Colorado Chorale. He's sung important tenor solos and roles in the Verdi Requiem, Orff Carmenina Burana, Haydn Creation, Beethoven's Ninth, Handel's Messiah. In the Grand Junction community, he served on the Grand Junction Commission on Arts and Culture, thank you, Western Equality, the Grand Junction Symphony Board, Western Colorado Chorale Board, where he's still active as Assistant Vice President. Most recently, he was appointed to the board of Colorado West Pride. He resides in Grand Junction and since retirement has become an avid hiker. I have trouble getting a hold of him because he's always out hiking. As well as an avid rock hound, wannabe geologist, and budding amateur photographer. He lives happily with Molly and Maggie, his beloved mini dachshunds, and Cleopatra and Aretha, his sweet adopted cats. So,
Good afternoon. Well, the ravages of 28 years of teaching took a toll on my voice, and it's called muscular dysphonia, wherein the muscles get so used to being active and used and stressed from very long days of teaching that they literally just tighten and they shake. So there can be pain if you keep trying to talk a lot. And there's ways around it. If you speak with an English accent, suddenly everything gets a lot better because the English use much more air and move air with grace and agility. Whereas we Americans tend to talk like this, really short and fast, and, you know. So you can see what the problem is. But the microphone, thank you for the microphone, really helps. Yeah, it was a long haul at Mesa and Colorado Mesa, and it was great to have some wonderful colleagues there, and nice to see some people here that I worked with, and we sang a lot, and we performed a lot, and we were on committees together, and we got a lot done. We did some really good stuff. And fortunately, it's still there. It's still functioning. So it's always good that things continue, right? Because sometimes today in our world, things are scary, right? Anyway, I have a number of pieces from some recitals I did. The pianist was a wonderful pianist. Her name was Ivana Chojbasic, Cojbasic, who was a Bulgarian who came with another faculty member, Michael Waldrop, who was a fabulous percussionist, Dr. Waldrop, really a demon at the drums. But Ivana was very elegant and graceful, and she played beautifully. And we did many programs together, and the first piece that I'm going to ask the technician to play is a Rachmaninoff piece, a very beautiful piece, about being in a beautiful place, perhaps on a hike, and you're just amazed at how beautiful everything is. And this is the poem by a lesser poet whose name is Galina. I don't know if it was a guy or a girl, to tell you the truth. It just says G. Galina. So this is Stias Horosho in Russian. And here's the translation. How beautiful it is here. I gaze around me where the golden brook flows past. The fields are covered with flowers. White clouds sail above. There is no one else here. Silence reigns. Here I am alone with God, with the flowers, the ancient pines, and with you. My only dream. And Rachmaninoff says it beautifully, and that "and you" is on a very high note. So, go ahead and play it. This is 2002.
Здесь хорошо, взгляни, вдали огнем горит река, светлым ковром луга легли, белеют облака.
students, when they would sing a song like that, and I would say, you know, it doesn't get any better than this. So that they knew that they had just really done an exceptional piece of music that started as a poem. Somebody lived that moment, Galena, and they had to recreate it. And of course, Luis knows this, and Sue knows this, and Alyssa knows this too. It's so magical what happens in the creation, the moment of creation, because it's all abstract, really. It happens in our brains, so we can't really always see it happening, but it happens. And that spark that happens with Galena eventually reached Rachmaninoff, this incredible pianist who was able to put it into music beautifully. And then he shared it with many singers. Believe it or not, he used to, he did a series of concerts around the turn of the century with the great Irish tenor, John McCormick, who used to sing this song in English because he didn't have great Russian skills. And it was How Fair the Spot. And that was the first time I ever heard it was a McCormick recording. And also on that same tour they would do, they did the tour with Fritz Kreisler. So here's these three giants of the early part of the 20th century, Rachmaninoff, McCormick, and Kreisler, in the room at the same time, doing this incredible music. And Rachmaninoff's had extra special settings where Kreisler would play along obligatos for quite a few of these songs that he had written. So this thing that happens in the brain that helps with creation is truly amazing. And the amazing thing is that this electrical activity, be it medieval writers in poetry or artists in other mediums like Sue's or music, it affects all artists the same way. Before Michelangelo laid on his back into the Sistine Chapel, he had an idea of what he wanted on that ceiling. So that impulse he got was the spark that took him through the whole ceiling, right? It's extraordinary to be there. So many people sometimes, but it's still extraordinary. And this little song, it's less than 2 minutes, is exceptional. That moment of creation sparks the performer to create or to recreate it. Us musicians, we're vital for creation because somebody like Beethoven wrote incredible music. The Ninth Symphony, the Emperor Concerto, amazing music, but the work is really left unfinished because he was relying on somebody else to complete it and perform it. Right? Interesting. Of course, Michelangelo did most of the work on the ceiling, but when it was done, it was done. But in music, and when your work is done, Sue, it's done. It's completed. You've completed it. Nobody else fools around with her work, and nobody else fools around with Luis's work. But in music and dance, especially, and to the same extent in theater, that those art forms are essential. That there are performers to finish the work, slightly reinterpret it, or give it a newer spin or a different spin. And the composer or the artist knew that that was part of the scene. And last but not least, in this little triangle that's being created here, composer, creator, performer, and now the audience gets to listen to this very short song, and hopefully you all liked it. Because it's such a beautiful piece of music, right? And it immediately, its effect is immediate, because it immediately says, beautiful, or lovely, lyricism. And in every case, there's all this like little abstract activity, this stuff we can't put our fingers on, going on in everybody's brain. But it's all similar activity. It's all pulling us all together in this form of creation, right? Artistic creation. So it's very special. And we don't think about it very often, right? We take it all for granted, or, you know, if it's not a good show, you say, oh, I wonder what's on Netflix, you know. But still, a lot of work went into the show, right? There was a lot of creation going on, and interpretation. I have a little more comment on this thing called creation of art and music. I had a great older voice teacher when I was just starting out, like I was 21 or 22. She was already 82. And she was still giving master classes. She was a Russian. Her name was Olga Fedorovsky Avarino. She married an Italian. A good guy. She liked him. She was a very famous singer in Boston around the 40s and 50s. Anyway, her family was in Russia during the revolution. They were well off. They used to hang out with famous people like Fyodor Shalapin, the great Russian bass. And they were faced with the scary moment of, we're in trouble here, we gotta get out. They sewed all their jewelry, anything valuable, into the linings of their coat, and got on a train and crossed Siberia and got into Mongolia and China and eventually to the United States. So, what a lucky kid to meet Olga, right? Because she maybe never would have been there, but she had this cool interpretation of this process. And she defined it down to just 2 words: the impulse and the release. And she would say, darling, if the impulse is correct, it will come out beautiful. And she was true. If you had done all your work, if you had prepared, you had worked on the music, you had worked on the language, you knew the right rhythms, you had it all together, and you knew exactly how you wanted to present it, the impulse was correct, chances are it's going to come out pretty good. And, it's such a simple way of saying, be prepared and do well. But that impulse and the release, because all of art is a release of this activity I'm talking about. I'm trying to get at here. I'm maybe not 100% here. But hopefully the release is immediate and it's technically strong. Because if it is, then we have people like Pavarotti, who maybe isn't the greatest intellect, but wow, what a technician, what a singer. He could move air, and boy, did he know how to ring tone. And as a singer, that's what you really want to do. You want to move the air and ring the tone, because everything that we do is on the air. And the instrument only works if the air is moving, right? You can have the greatest vocal cords, ever created, but if the air isn't passing between them, they will not come together and vibrate correctly. But Pavarotti knew how to do that. So did Mr. McCormick, great Irish singer. All right, I think we should hear another one here and give my little old-time voice a rest. This is a famous tune, Think About Dorothy. And the scene where she's talking to Toto over the rainbow. This is the same program in 2002.
When all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all around, heaven opens a magic lane. When all the clouds darken up the skyway, there's a rainbow highway to be found, leading from your window pane. where troubles melt like lemon drops, away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh, why can't if happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't
That's the next music, right? The witch comes. And I wanted to do Toto too in the middle of it, right? What's it called? That's a great tune. I'm going to move it along here a little bit. The next tune comes from a different program that was called East and West. I can pass this program around, you folks can look at it. It's one of my last few copies, so please don't walk away with it. It was an interesting program I did with Ivana that featured all music that had come almost like in a traveling way of coming from the East, with lots of Russian and European music, coming all the way across America, and ending up with Hollywood musicals and movie songs at the end. One of the pieces I picked from Europe was an Obrados song in Spanish, Del Cabello Más Sutil, which translates to Of the Softest Hair. Wonderful little collection of kind of famous Spanish tunes that Obrados put together and edited and presented in a collection. So this is another beautiful song, a very sensual song. Of the softest hair, which you wear in braids, I shall make a chain to draw you to my side. My darling, I would love to be a glass in your house, to kiss your lips whenever you took a drink. So, a very sensual song by Mr. Obrados. It's a nice little hot song. Do I have time for one more or not?
Well, technically no.
All right, I mentioned Mr. McCormick earlier, and McCormick was one of the great singers of the world, but he made a huge career here in America. And he traveled all around, and he did wonderful programs that were as complete as any other famous European who would come after him. He was one of the first. Of course, the other great tenor, early 20th century, was Caruso. And they were colleagues, and they were actually very good friends. It's quite a time in the world. Anyway, Mr. McCormick would do very sophisticated programs with Italian, arias by Mozart, Lieder by Schubert, or Hugo Wolf, which is pretty sophisticated. And then he would end with Irish songs and American or English art songs. And this is a great song by an American. It's almost very French sounding, impressionistic sounding. It's called Swans. It's number 19 on that, it's the last track on that second CD. And it's a beautiful song for encores or to end a program. Very atmospheric, and if you close your eyes, you'll see the swans.
Night is over the park, and a few brave stars look on the lights that link it with chains of gold. The lake bears up the reflection in broken bars that seems too heavy for tremulous water to hold. We watch the swans that sleep in a shadowy place. And now and again one wakes and uplifts its head. Oh, still you are.
Forever. Her favorite themes to explore through fiber and collage originate in unique cultures, poignant events, and the natural world. She researches new techniques, and she selects materials and assembles each piece her personal understanding and emotion come through. Her work is thoughtful, expressive, and educational. Sue is a third-generation artist from two professional painters. Her paint is fiber and fabric. Her brushes are thread work and found textural materials. That's hard to say. She brings color and texture together in her work. With a BS in textiles and clothing design, she veered into various marketing communications positions in the corporate world. After raising 2 children, she began exploring traditional quilting on the East Coast. A move to Colorado changed her perspective, and she adapted to fiber art. There are unlimited possibilities with fiber art, and I intend to explore most of them, she predicts. So, I will be attempting to assist her, and hopefully
right.
I'll parade things in the right order in here, and so.
Very good.
She's going to explain some of her artwork over here. Okay, Sue.
Well, I want to, can you hear me? First, I want to thank Linda for calling, and for my friend Lynn Frazier, who's not here, but some of you know her. She's the one that let the cat out of the bag. So I got here somehow, but, and thanks to KAFM, I think this is a wonderful room. I appreciate being here. The headline on your flyer mentions the word batik. How many of you know what that means? 3, 4? All right, well, here we go. You cannot understand a thing about what I do, which has nothing to do with only batik, but if Linda will just start these one at a time, they're the most wonderful fabric. Their origin is Indonesian, and in those early days in Indonesia, people made these designs by taking a piece of cloth, and then they had a pen or a brush or a device that they would dribble wax all over it in a design. Then they dip the cloth in the dye bath, pull it out again, heat away, dissolve the wax, and they have their design. But that wasn't enough. They would do it again and put it in another color. And that's how these are done professionally or commercially today. These are all commercial fabrics. But you can feel how tightly woven they are. And the colors somehow are lovely. And so almost every fiber artist I know has a stash of batiks because we can cut them into little slivers or use a big piece and they don't ravel, and they're wonderful things. So that's the origin of that. And fiber art itself is, I think, kind of a combination of quilting and collage. So to make a quilt, I'm going to show you, this is the beginning of fiber art. This is what we call a quilt sandwich. And you can all take a look at the quilt sandwich. It has layers to it. And the top fabric is the finished picture. Then underneath that, there's this almost invisible webbing that you'll see. And fiber artists use that as a form of glue, but it attaches your top to the next layer, which is the soft and fuzzy layer, the batting. So you iron your top fabric to the batting, and it's there for good. So don't think that we turn under the edges and do anything fine and darling like the original quilters did. Oh, no, no, no. We're cutting and we're pasting, and that brings you to the idea of collage, which is cutting and pasting wonderful pictures and images and then affixing them with a surface sealer to cardboard or a firm wooden background. So that's why I say we're a combination. This fiber art isn't really a traditional quilt at all. It doesn't go on a bed. It's a piece of art using collage methods, and we also add paper. You'll see that in one of my pieces. And I'm getting braver. I love paper, and I love paint, and I'm adding things to my things. And it doesn't matter how many layers I have, so it's really kind of fun that way. I'm going to go through what I plan to talk about. I'm going to show you some samples. Here are some samples of me kind of getting out of the box a little bit. They're tiny, but you always have to explore new things, and these explain themselves. But it's not just about fabric that you buy in the store. These are things that I tried to make. I'm always learning something new, and I painted fabric, and you'll see, they're just a little different than a commercial thing. But I do want to talk about the creative process and what inspires me, and then I want to show you some examples because that'll make it all come together for you. As far as my creative life, all I can say is it's in serious trouble. Serious trouble. Because to lead a creative life, you have to dedicate time to it. And I seem to have less and less discipline as I get older, and I didn't have very much in the beginning. So I'm one of those people that likes to get out. I like to hike. I like to meet new people. I've only been in this area for 10 years, so I've just scratched the surface, traveled through many of the parks and got the western bug, but here we are, and here I am to stay. And since I'm single and retired, why couldn't I just do this all day? Why couldn't I dedicate my time to the thing I like to do the most? I don't know. I'm in serious trouble. That's all I can say. So part of my distractions have to do with some volunteer work and friends. I like to get out and be with people. And I also, in the summer, have a flower gardening business, and I do flower beds and pots. And so that keeps me busy outside for the summer. But the creative process, if you remember, we all do, we either were children once and we can remember back that far, we were children once, or we have children or grandchildren. Don't they have fun with finger paints and paints and coloring and Play-Doh? And they just go and they're quiet and they're spending time and they're alone and they don't usually talk to anybody else. They're just into their project, and then when they're done, they're so proud, and we hang it on the refrigerator and everybody's so happy with what they did. And then eventually someone says, "Oh, honey, you shouldn't be coloring that way. Why don't you color within the lines? Try that." And they say, "Oh, I have to work? This is hard work. I have to keep it in between the lines." And then we say, we kind of put it all in a drawer and close the drawer and become grown-ups, and we forget how to play. And years go by sometimes. Only the most juvenile adults have time to play and keep it up. But most of us abandon whatever that wonderful spirit was, and Jack called it a spark, and it is a spark. I'm not sure it is for the children. I don't think they don't need a spark. It's in your brain, it's just happening. And so when we, as adults, open that drawer, we need to develop a way to go back there and have that kind of fun. And so we need to be mindful of a project and give ourselves time to do it. And one of my tricks is to never put it away. It is not a bad thing, it is your friend. And the more you look at it and the more you see it, the more it talks to you, and then it starts to change and develop, and then you work on it for a little while, and then you have 3 days on a hike and a trip and the family comes or something, and that thing is still out there. In the meantime, you've been haunted by your subconscious because you got started on it. And your subconscious is so busy. Oh my goodness, and it's invasive, and we don't know when it's going to hit us, but in the middle of the night you'll wake up and say, "Oh, I should make that sky purple." And then when you're out in the car or on a hike or something, you say, "Look at the shadow of that man on that. The sun is up here and I'm doing it all wrong. The shadow comes out of his foot and goes over there. I've got my hiking thing all messed up, but I thought of it. Finally, I thought of it. It wasn't right in the beginning." So you kind of get sensory overload sometimes, but you can go into a zone with this. Once you get working and you really are into your project, I call it going into the zone, or just being buried by the whole thing. And you start revising and revising, and you're happy. You're not fixing mistakes, you're just making it good. And your ideas are flowing. And if you get stuck, you can always talk to a friend or find another artist and say, "What do you think I'm doing here? How does this look?" And they say, "Well, for a turtle, it's not bad." And you say, "A turtle? It's so brown. It's really the cliffs over there." Oh, I can see that now. And then you know you've got a little problem. The eye of the beholder is something that can be wonderful or not so wonderful, depending. But it is, when you're in that place, when you're building it, our mind really does concentrate on one thing. Do you know what I'm saying to you? You're not multitasking anymore. And your brain is thanking you. And when I do this, I do not listen to music. I'm very sorry. It's a very quiet place for me. I'm alone. Time absolutely isn't there. And I'm thinking about this thing, and it's growing. My husband and I, my husband was a great appreciator of what I did, and in the football season was my favorite time to do my quilting, because he forgave me, and I didn't have to watch every Sunday afternoon program with him. And so I would go to my place and do my thing, and he would be watching the game, and then hours would go by. I'd be so happy in there, and finally he'd say, I started dinner, I'm really kind of hungry, do you want to join me? And I would have no idea, and I wasn't even hungry, and that's the other thing, you don't eat when you're doing this. You just don't ever think of it. It's quite an astonishing thing. So I think it's very healthy to have a creative thing like this to do. And I firmly believe that every person in this room is creative in some way. And the same thing drives me that drives her music and your music and poetry and writing and film. And think about photographers who do it professionally, just a million people, and those that are focused and have that interest just captured. My particular envy has to do with people into fitness. They find this time every day, thank you, and they go into their zone, and they are fit, and they are happy. Good for them. They're being creative in another way. We are all creative people, and one of the things that annoys me so much, I'll show my quilt or I'll hold something up and people will pat me on the shoulder and say, you're so creative, you're so talented. And I feel like saying, and so are you. You just don't do what I do, but you do something, and if you don't, please find it, because your brain needs to use that side.
That's right.
It's good exercise for you. So I think you're all on that same wavelength with me. So my inspiration, I thought about what in the world is it that inspires me. One thing I know is experiences. Another one is photographs, either something that I see somewhere else, or a photo that I take. I absolutely love the cell phone cameras. There is no excuse for not having it in your pocket and taking a picture of the melting bubble gum on the cement when you're out. Look at the world around you. Learn how to see things and take close-ups and get down on the ground and, you know, get small and take a picture of a thing. And then take them home, or take the whole scene, by golly, they're fabulous. Take them home and look at them and edit them, just a little. I'm not talking fancy Photoshop, just crop them and make them smaller and get that subject where you want it. And then do yourself a favor, print them out, black and white for some, color for some, and just put them in a folder and say, I took those, I took those. And when you're feeling creative and you want to do something, something else might pop into your head that is like that kind of an experience, or a photograph that inspires you. Other things are your pure imagination. Several people in this art quilt guild that I belong to, they don't use very many reference materials. Their brains are filled with wonderful ideas, and they never have to think about it. And I'm jealous of people like that. I'm not like that. I have one quilt I'm showing you out of my imagination, and all the rest have come because of something else. And the last one for me is an emotional response. I'm very surprised sometimes how I will read a book or go to a place, meet a certain kind of people somewhere that are very colorful or something, or go to an event, and it will capture me emotionally. And later on, I'll want to do that. I want to make a quilt of that. And you'll see some that are like that. So I have experiences, photographs, imagination, and emotional responses. Those are my biggies. So let's start with, Linda's gonna be my Vanna White today. And we're gonna start with experiences, that little one, the little one. This is one of the first hikes that I took when I was here in the West. And it's a hike in Utah called Corona Arch. And it's near Moab. And it's about a 3-hour hike. It's not terribly long, lots of slick rock. And this is number 1. And I think it happened almost 10 years ago. And there are photographs blown up and cropped in a folder of 2 through 7. And they're still there. So you have number 1 in a series. Something happened, I lost focus, I'm going to finish them someday. And I can visualize all 7, and guess what number 7 is? The Arch. And it's all about getting there and how beautiful Utah is. But sometimes you don't finish what you start. The second hike is one that's up there. Do you see the one with the trees? Okay. Now, this is Palisade Rim hike. Have any of you taken that one? Okay, well, do you remember seeing rock after rock after rock with lichen on them? I named this Lichen Hikin' because it was an early hike for me, and I was not taken with much of it except that lichen. I came home with 100 pictures of lichen on rocks. And I learned another technique called wool felting. So you can go up and touch those lichens, and they're really soft and wonderful. And I saw baby blue lichen, bright yellow, chartreuse, black, white, brown, and that lovely orange. And I did enjoy the view from the top, as you can see, off to the side. The cherry blossom, the orchards were in bloom. And they were off in the distance when you get up to the top. It's a beautiful, wonderful hike. If you haven't taken it, please do. And so then I just thought I'd better, being from the East, you know, what's a hike without some trees? And I was trying to play around with how do I make tree trunks out of fabric in a new way, so I did. And everybody likes the trunks better than anything else in the picture. But they weren't really there, so that was my imagination combining with a bunch of pictures. So that's how that one came about. So then the next one, would you hold up the one of the book? Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Listen very hard. And if you already know the answer, don't tell. I'm going to mention the name of a character in a book. His name is Lord Peter Wimsey. Have you ever heard of him?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you've heard of him. 1, 2, 3. There are now 5 people living in Grand Junction who know Lord Peter Wimsey. And the name of this quilt is Lord Peter Wimsey. And it does not work with the viewer. Nobody knows what it is. They say, oh, such nice stitching for the pages. Thanks. They say, what is it? Now, you don't ever want to make anything that someone's going to say, what is it? What's the problem here? There are abstract artists, and sometimes I say, what is it? But they are beautiful things. This one did not work. And Lord Peter is there. He's a detective. Smarter than smart. The author is Dorothy Sayers. These are books about the turn of the century. Therefore, the Victorian fabrics, the velvets, the brocades. He was such a gentleman. He had beautiful ties and things. I got carried away with all of that and Lord Peter himself just because the art quilt gave us a theme called A Bit of Whimsy. Oh, that's why I did it. But I'm the only person, other than you, several, who know this inside story. So there you have it. Always identify, think about your viewer. I'm going to ask you to look at the picture on the right-hand side that's hanging up. You tell me what that is about. That one. What's it a picture of?
Doors.
Thank you very much. The name of it is Doors. Now that's an example of something that you can walk up to and say, oh, that's about doors. And I'm just trying to say, don't get too obtuse in your work. Those doors happen to be the best doors in houses that we've lived in Washington State and Maryland and so forth. And the bottom one is Colorado. So the reason for that was another challenge called doors. And the kinds of doors that were handed in were amazing. And I'll tell you just a little bit of why I keep mentioning my art group. Twice a year we have an opportunity to fit into a theme and create a quilt around that theme. And we have about 40 members and about 25 of them will hand something in. And there are no two quilts remotely alike. Doors brought things you wouldn't believe. Doors, but many kinds of doors. And so we have a national juror who looks at our quilts and reviews them and then kicks out a few, but they're pretty kind because we're a pretty sharp group. And they are sent to international quilt festivals for display. We can't sell them, there are no awards, but we feel good about being in an international show in California, or right now some of our things are in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, at a big show there. So that's why these themes come up, a bit of whimsy, doors, you never know. So then there's one quilt, the small flowers, do you see that one? This one is actually from my imagination. I got it in my head early on that I wanted to do flowers from the perspective of a rabbit. Well, if you're really a rabbit, you can't even see the flowers, I don't think, unless you stand on your hind legs. And you certainly wouldn't see the mountain in the background. But I wanted to be close up to those flowers and sort of embedded with them. And it was early and I didn't have my stitching down. And I wanted a reason to practice this elegant stitching that you see on many pieces. And with art quilting, it doesn't matter how perfect it is. We have people who do perfect stitching, but I'm not one of them. You just have to practice and practice, and if they're not all the same, they're not all the same. So the next quilt is that gray one hanging there. Do you see that one? This was done for an exhibit in the Art Center called Women and War. And it is an emotional response of mine to a book called The Book Thief. Did anybody read that? No. It turns out to be my favorite book. It's billed as for an adolescent audience, and in Grand Junction in about the 8th grade, the Holocaust is taught to the kids, and they read The Book Thief. And I was so taken by that. The narrator in the book is Death himself or herself, and Death says, I just hate war. I am so tired because I have to work overtime. And his job is to wait till the proper moment to harvest someone's soul and take it away to wherever souls go. And that's the essence of the tragedy of death. And the story is about a little girl who steals a book, even though she can't read, from a grave of her little brother. And she is taken into a German family who will take care of her because she's an orphan. And she has some wonderful times. And it's a lovely, lovely story. And the thing that's original, I used the book as a reference, and one of the copies had illustrations in it. So that little girl is a little bit like those illustrations. And the top of it has all these circles, and then there's red yarn going up, and those red circles are the souls. And they're the souls of many of the characters of the book. So you can see what happens when you have an emotional response to an event. And I have read a lot about World War II. My dad was a soldier in World War II, but he was in England and Belgium at the time. But it just shows you where these things can come from. Another thing that brings things about, do you see the small petroglyph there? Is travel and experiences. Petroglyphs are sort of mysterious. Don't you, you all know what they are, right? This rock art that we have. I'm naming this one, I'm the Man, for obvious reasons. There's no question about that. But outside of Albuquerque, there is a lava rock national park. And these boulders are huge, but they're all lying on the ground. And so you just walk among them, and they all have petroglyphs on them. And no two are the same, and they've been there forever. And so when I experience something new like that in a culture that I'm not familiar with, sometimes I'm moved to do something. And on this one, I used hand stitching to imitate the pecking into the rock. And then because it was Albuquerque, I had to add a little silver, a little turquoise, don't you think, along the outside edge. He was born in Albuquerque, as you remember. He was taught there. So I'm always enamored of that part. So I embellished that a little bit. So that's an example of being affected by an experience in a new place. The next one, we need a very tall man for this one. This one is named Mola Mia. And it started with the yellow mola, which is an embroidered piece of cotton in the center of the panel of 3 molas there. I was given that about 40 years ago. And the skill comes from Panama. The women there make molas constantly, and they sell them, and they hang them from clotheslines, and they wave in the breeze. And they are in a technique called reverse applique, which means you put a fabric underneath another fabric, and you applique the top one down so you can see the underneath one. And they'll do 3 or 4 of those in different places in the fabric and in one design. So once I researched it, I learned about the ladies. So guess what? My quilt is affected by the culture that I learned about. And when they're out there in their native garb, wearing their molas as blouses, they have 1 gold ring in their nose, they have a choker of puka beads, and 1 long rope of shells in a solid color. And so I found the shells and I put them into the quilt, and I also did the little brass ring, and then I taught myself how to do it and made 3 or 4, whatever they are, in the middle, and put wire behind them so they would look like they were waving in the breeze. So you research something, you learn more, and it makes your work better, which is true of music and poetry and all of that too. So then we go into a little bit more of the Southwest. The first smaller one is one of my favorites. It was taken out in Sago Canyon near Thompson Springs. Has anyone been there? At the coal mine ruins. Beautiful petroglyphs there. And this was past the petroglyphs. You can take a hike and you see the old commissary and the coal mine that was there. And I took many pictures of this old commissary, which was 3 levels. And here's the miners spending their money in the commissary. And so I call it, I owe my soul to the company store. And it is from my photograph. And I call it paint by numbers, because anybody can do this. If you have your own photograph, don't try to use a photograph out of Time Magazine or National Geographic, it's illegal. You have to use your own or get permission from someone else to use their photo. You can actually cut the pieces of fabric exactly the size of your blown up image, and it's like doing a puzzle or something, and then you can add some paint to it or whatever. I love that thing. It brings me right back to that place every single time, and it is definitely paint by number, as opposed to some of the other ones. And then the last one is fairly recent. We had a theme of horizons, and Luis ought to be in heaven now. He's been there. And a lot of you have been there. Anybody know where this is besides Carla? This is Acoma, outside of Albuquerque, and they call it, the little community on the top of that 500-foot mesa is called Sky City, and you can go up there, and they've been living on the top of that mesa for 1,200 years, or since 1200, excuse me, since 1200. And in the 1600s, the missionaries came and they got welcomed in, and they built a big cathedral, which is there. It's in the middle of everything. It's an adobe cathedral. And when you go in there, you see a beautiful blue and white lady on the altar and a beautiful ear of corn right next to it. So I think they kind of went along with it. It was a good idea. But I'm not sure they bought into it 100%. They still like their corn a whole lot. So, at least that's my interpretation of it. But that is another one. There's a lot of memory is driving me there. It's not a paint by number. And I really, really enjoyed going to Acoma. I've been there twice. I would go back again, and I'm enamored of the pottery. You notice the pot on the side? And that's another technique that we use in fiber art. We can take an image, and I did have permission to use that one, an image, and have it printed on cloth at a place like Copy Copy. Enlarge it to whatever you want, and then it's yet another fabric that you have to play with. And so that's what I did with those pots. So you know how I got where I got, and you know I don't spend as much time on it as I wish I did, but I thank you very much for enjoying it, and feel free to go look up close later on.
Great. It always adds so much to hear the stories behind things, the pieces and the poetry and the artwork. Champion fiddler and brilliant classical violinist Alicia Bean completed her master's degree in violin performance at Arizona State University with a full scholarship. She has performed in quartets, ensembles, and orchestras around the U.S., Spain, and Italy. She's appeared as a soloist with the Grand Junction High Symphony Orchestra and the Mesa State College Orchestra. When she is not performing classically, she loves to indulge in fiddling and other styles of music. She began fiddling as a summer hobby, and for 6 years in a row won competitions all over Colorado, including Delta, Royal Gorge, Frisco, and Montrose. Alicia is a very impassioned player who embraces the stage and enjoys sharing her music with anyone who will listen. Away from the violin, she is totally in love with her young daughter.
Hello. Nice to see you all today. So, lots of wonderful things to follow. For me, this is my life, my passion. Was not always. So at first it was a mama's dream. So that kind of thing was how we started when I was young. Lots of battles there. So your art form is never always what you might think it might be, you know, and it was probably high school before I decided that this was actually something cool that I was really in love with and wanted to pursue, and found my passion in it then. So it's interesting because for this, the best way I can describe it for me, I feel like what I've always been drawn to is the fact that no matter what language you speak or where you're from or what you are, especially like listening to his music, it's not even in the language we understand, but you feel something. And so that's always been my biggest drive, is that I may not play perfect, I may not be, you know, but as long as I tell a story, and that's what I love about it. So I kind of relate to, like, if you think of a child's coloring book. So for me, I am given my parameters, I'm given my boundaries of where I should maybe fit and stylistically where I might or should be, but then I am able to kind of create my own thing from that. One of the things that stuck with me the most, one of my favorite teachers I had, was just that we were studying early music, like Corelli and back then, and everything had its affect. So it's like you would take a movement and it was supposed to portray something, such as joy or a march or whatever it was, but it had its affect that you were supposed to find. And I loved him, and I will never be as eloquent or find the words like he did, but he just, when we go through pieces, you would just find, oh, this is like petting a fuzzy kitten, you know, like, but we would find those moments. And so I actually really enjoy looking through my old music when I had him, because I would try and write in all this stuff, like trying to find what I was trying to portray. But for me, you know, studying-wise is most of the world is delved in classical, and, you know, the way I pursued, but it wasn't enough for me, and so summers, yes, I needed a break, I needed to reprieve. And so while I love classical and all that it provides, like, I just needed that other side. So I would do the fiddling, and I would do some Irish and different things that just gave me different avenues. So especially too, I feel like, because especially in my world, like in the classical studies, like I don't get to choose a lot of what I do. You're in symphony, and here's your music. You're in this group, and here's your music. And as much as I find something to love in most of it, there is that to it. So I really enjoy still doing my solo performances and things where I can choose my works. And my passion's always been more in like the Romantic era and all of that. Like I like the schmaltzy stuff. But that's why I think I love the fiddling and the Irish stuff too, just so much, because it is just more flair and passionate and forgiving, and, you know, just a whole different element. But so I kind of just prepared a few things, pulled out a few things today. I'll start with a classical work box, just so you kind of see, and then I'll kind of dabble in and show you some other works, like kind of a glimpse of what like my competition life would be with the bluegrass, and then a little bit of the Irish, just can you kind of see where everything wraps around. Totally different, but kind of all the same. tell a story, and that can be a whole journey as far as how I find that story or how it relates to me. But the biggest one, and that's what I do with my students a lot, I talk about finding colors or changing colors or moods, or they have to kind of find it for themselves. I can kind of give them ideas of, again, like, you know, like if, for example, like a random one would be like, this is the mama bear voice, you know, and then this is the kid, and you get lighthearted. Like, you can give them ideas, but I feel like they always have to find their own personal rendition of that. And so while I'm telling a story usually through my music, it's not necessarily something, you're not gonna know my exact story, but it's trying to make you feel something, connect with something internally, and you're gonna have your own memory or whatever that's gonna spark, as they say, into your own personal version of it. But I'm still trying to portray that emotion and feeling. So a big one for me that's been a favorite of mine and my father's, for when we did the competition world, was called 50 Year Ago Waltz. So again, just the name sparks interest in certain things, but this is just one of our favorites. I thought I would share. Waltzers are always one of my favorites. Lots of good melodies. That's the other thing too, I'm kind of an odd duck in the family. Our family's all science, nurses, all that other stuff. That's, who'd you come from? But I always felt like my dad. I'm like, we're just the black sheep, it's okay. So, and that's one of the hard ones, whether you, like, we're inspired to do something and it doesn't necessarily fit, doesn't necessarily seem like the right path, and your family may tell you you're crazy, but we get those desire, you know, we have it in us, and like she said, it maybe whether it's working out or whatever it is, that there is that internal desire and passion to find something that we can be creative and build ourselves at. And so I'm, like I said, I'm a black sheep, but I've found lots of joy in this creative process, and so it's been a blessing for me that way. So when we do the fiddling stuff, I have to prepare, it would be like a round. So you'd have a hoedown to start, a waltz in the middle, and then you'd finish it with like a tune of choice. Didn't mean tune of choice. There was lots of rules that you could not do trick tunes, things like that. Like everybody knows Orange Blossom Special, you can't play that. So there was rules to it too, but it still was a tune of choice. But this is Beaumont Rag, and a little more funky flair. I like this one, and that would kind of fall into that category. So play this one for you. Did some group stuff with kind of in Irish world, so just kind of combining some Irish fiddling and different things, and just kind of fun. Just again, another element, another faction of what I could do. Just especially too, I feel like at different times, like I'll just get kind of stagnated in what I'm doing, and I just need that other avenue, something to kind of revive and refresh, because I don't want to not do what I'm doing. But I have to put something down, and I have to pick something else up that just sparks again, and that inspires. And so that's why I have all these different things that keep me going. So revolving door of fun. So, but this one is a compilation of two tunes that are kind of pieced together. A little slow intro one called Star the County Down, and then a Tamlin one that was put together. This would normally be performed with a lot more people, but I've still got some good parts in there to kind of play and show you something kind of fun. So.
We're gonna take a couple minutes break. We'll let Alicia get back up and get seated. Then we'll spend about 15 minutes. I'm gonna ask them questions. I'll give you guys a little chance to ask them a question or two. And then we'll have some time for you to visit with them and look closer at the artwork or question more closely about things they might have said. So we'll take a couple minutes break, so if you need to get up and move around a little, go for it. One of the challenges to this is making up questions that'll have meaning for everyone. And you know, if you don't want to answer a question, fine. You know, you can pass it on to somebody else or whatever. But we'll hope that you all could answer some of these in some form if you'd like. I think what comes to mind for a lot of us, Rosemary Watola Tromer in one of her poems wrote, "It's not what I expected," said the fish when given wings. And so my first question is, were your artistic skills evident from a young age, or were they a surprise to you at one point? Or did you have someone or something that inspired you to become the artist that you have become? And you want to start, Alicia, and we'll work our way down the line maybe?
Oh, do I have to use this thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like I said, for me, no, they were not apparent, and I was definitely not one of the naturally gifted ones, so I had to work very hard for everything that I gained, and it was a struggle at times seeing ones around me that are like, I'll learn that concerto next week, and I'm like, okay, give me 6 months, you know? So that one was a kind of a challenge, but I'm competitive and I like the challenge. So, I mean, but it's definitely something for me that I've had to work really hard for and continue to work hard for. There's no taking anything for granted because it's not in there. I have to build it and work for it, so.
And for me, I grew up in this family of artists, and I had a great aunt who was a potter, a grandmother who was an artist and made her living. Her husband died very early. She raised 3 children with her fine art painting. And so it was a thing. It was just around. And then I learned to sew, and my mom made all my clothes. So between those two things, it came pretty naturally to me to want to be working with my hands in one way or another. And it just evolved over time.
My parents, of course, loved the fact that I could sing well, and they always encouraged me, which was great. And then there was a never-ending group of musicians and performers that got behind me and encouraged me through junior high school and on into higher ed and study. And that list is very long. You don't want to hear it, but there were many people that helped move me ahead and move me forward. So it's a really huge group of people. It's quite a collaboration. It's always interesting when people say, "Oh, I never studied with anyone," or "I never took any lessons," and then you find out their parents were virtuosos or something, right? So they were always getting lessons. There was always music in my house. There was always playing all the time. So.
Were you drawn to the classical right away, or more pop sort of stuff?
No, it was more musicals, the big band singers, Sinatra, Ella, Rosemary Clooney. My mother loved Perry Como, that smooth stuff, and the Broadway shows. My Fair Lady was huge. Hello Dolly was huge when I was a kid. So Fiddler on the Roof was huge. And when I was about 14 and a half or 15, I got into my first production of Carousel. So that was a big step. So, yep.
My first introduction into being inspired was through art. My brother and I, he's 2.5 years younger than I am, did comic strips. We'd sit on the kitchen table and have big pieces of paper, and he was a much better drawer than I was, but boy, we both did beautiful comic strips. Then we got into storyline, and so he said, "Let's make up a story, and then I'll draw it, and then I'll leave the little what do you call those things on top? Yeah, he says, I'll leave those for you and you can write the story. And so we did. And so that's how I got into actual storyline writing. But I didn't like my brother because he was a better artist than I was. And I struggled to become that good artist. And I've become a somewhat okay artist, loving cartoon work. That's cartoon work on that handout that I gave you. But that's how I got started. My grandmother told a lot of stories in Spanish. And some of you know the story of La Llorona, you know, the woman, the crying woman. And she would tell me those stories, and she'd tell me stories about the stars and stuff. And somehow or other that got into my head, and I became a storyteller. I love telling stories, and that's why I put it in my poetry.
This is kind of a not as technical or scholarly a question. How do you reward yourself, or what's your guilty pleasure?
Well, that's what I was gonna laugh, because I was gonna tease her. My favorite thing, like when I was doing schooling at UNC, there was a 7-Eleven right at the corner I could see, and I had to go get my brownie, and then I had to go. But for me, I'm a foodie, so I don't know, but when I practice, that's my thing. Like, I have to have my treats. To be in the practice room for 6 hours, I'd have to have treats to keep me going. But that was my reward for practice and to keep going, but that's kind of the pick.
Well, my guilty pleasure is buying more fabric. Put me loose in a quilt store, I don't have any money left. But the other thing is I have to consume some chocolate every day about 10:30 at night. It can even be on a spoon out of the Nutella jar. I don't care what it is.
Chocolate is good any time of the day. I try not to have it more than twice, though.
Oh dear.
I've gotten into hiking, and I know a lot of the trails Sue was talking about. And I also started buying cameras to take pictures of this beautiful country that we live in. And now I'm learning how to use the jazzy cameras, so that's fun. Of course, the other great pleasure is a fine highball. I hope you all know how to make a highball. I hope.
Lifetime skill.
Yes. A lot of people today do not know what a highball is, and they sure do not know how to make it, because they try to make the mixer to go with the bourbon or something, with Coke and something else. I said, no, that's not a highball. It's like some terrible thing. But a highball is usually with soda or ginger ale. Okay. I never accept it if it's not with ginger ale or soda. Just say no. And a Peach Street Brewery in Palisade, very good bourbon. Very good bourbon. So,
They'll pay you in a highball for that commercial.
I would take a highball.
I don't know that I have any rewards that, you know, if I do a number of pieces of work in art and I take it to the art center and they put it up there, that's a great reward, you know, to have people come and look at your work. And I've had that done a few times, both with my tin work and the tableaus and other things that I do. That's always fun. But I have another life. I'm an athlete, and I've always have been, you know, and I was a catcher in baseball and all that. And my reward now for my living a long time, you'll find me at every baseball game that the Mavs play, at every basketball game, and all those things. My wife and I are always there. My wife was, when I met her, she was an opera singer. So by knowing her, I got to know opera really well. I love opera. She hated sports. She had nothing to do with sports. Now she's more into athletics and sports than I am. She loves it. She'll sit down and watch 3 or 4 games on TV. She doesn't sing anymore, though, and that's sad.
This brings me to my next question. Alicia, this probably hasn't hit you much, but it may, you know. As you age, the things that you're able to do changes. And do you see this as an inspiration to learn something new and different, or has it been frustrating for you, or how have you reinvented yourself sometimes? Why don't we start with you, Louise?
Well, I'm constantly reinventing myself. The hardest part of reinventing myself was not having to work anymore when I retired. That was just so difficult. Because I always thought I was going to have all this time to do all this artwork and all this writing and stuff. And what happened? I had too much time. I didn't know how to use it. So it took me a long time to learn how to use it, force myself to go downstairs, sit at my desk, do work and stuff like that. And so then I started playing games, really, to make myself do it. Yeah, that was the hardest thing for me.
Yeah, I've discovered that if you have something that needs to be done, you better get up in the morning and go do it. Because there's so many distractions that will come along during the day, and then you won't get your project done or that thing you wanted to work on done. So, and the transition to retirement is tough. If you're under, there's some younger folks here, get ready. It ain't easy. And also, make sure you're saving some money. I'm serious. Save your money for retirement, because you just can't rely on any government assistance really here. So you better be ready for it. So I don't know if I gave a good answer, but I mean, you do get to try and do new things that I always wanted to go hiking and exploring, but I was always so damn busy at school, with 10, 12-hour days. You can't do that stuff. You don't have the energy. You need 3 or 4 hours to go for a good hike. And if you're taking pictures, you need all of the 4 hours. Because you go home, you have 100 pictures to look at. So there's new things. I still have a few students, and that's great, because now, my expertise is so immediate with people, and I'm able to say immediately what needs to happen. If you want your singing to be better, this is what you have to do right at this moment. This is what you need to do. And some people immediately, take that information and snap. Everything's better. So that's fun. But yeah, I really miss the students. That energy and that desire for knowledge and talent. I miss that. It's too bad we have to retire.
I don't think it's too bad at all.
In that regard of working with the younger talented kids.
Yes, well, no, I know what you're saying. You really have to, when you retire, you're not who you were at all. And one day it's all gone. And those are the people you worked with and that you knew. And it forms your identity, and it's not there anymore. And you have to really start over. And in a way, it's a gift. You can say, well, who do I want to be now? And a lot of factors get in the way or form you into a new person. And it's not necessarily work. It can be fun because you have time to expose yourself to things either that you've never done before or do some things you didn't get enough of when you were working. But I think as a retiree, the most important thing is experiences. While you can move around, for heaven's sakes, don't say no to any new experience or an experience you love. If you love hiking, get out there as often as you can. I like to hike. I'm not much of a climber, but I get slower and slower because I keep getting distracted with my camera and my tiny things that I see. And a real hiker is out there for the exercise. They're in the dust somewhere ahead of me, and I'm saying, oh, look at this, beautiful, So you make it what you can, and I'm all for retirement. I don't think it's sad. I like it. It's new people, new activities, a whole new life.
For me, I think being in the music world will be a continual reinvention of myself and growth. I've been through many chapters already and have many to come. I think one of the hard ones that I'm still working through currently, even though I'm 10-year post-grad, is I spent so many years being devoted to my music. I'd spend 6 to 8 hours a day engrossed in music, practicing, solitary for a lot of it, because we have to practice so much on our own, and then with groups and part of it. But that was my drive and my goal. And then you get out of school, and now it's like, well, now what do I do with myself, And like they say, finding the time for your passion and your love is actually really hard. Like, now that I have my daughter, who I want to devote time to, while trying to balance work and life, I find it hard to find that time. I would love to practice even an hour a day, but that's at midnight when I have no brain left. It doesn't always go well. But it's just a continual process, and I'm excited for that. And at times, yes, I miss that part. But then now I have these groups I get to play with, and different opportunities come. And so I think you just have to continually be looking at where your passion lies and what your hope is, and realize that it's going to be a journey that is going to change, and it's going to evolve. And, the best way, like I said, I just feel like it's chapters. There's a lot of story to come, and I've had a lot in my past, and some of it's hard to let go and process, but again, just trying to grab in all these skills and things I can, and I don't know where I'll end up, but just taking it in as I go.
I'm going to end with a question, maybe a little more frivolous, maybe not. Who would you want to have dinner with, and why? You want to start, Sue?
I'll start. She gave us a chance to think about this.
Yes.
I must say. At first I thought, I don't know who I would want to have dinner with. I decided I wanted to have dinner with Sacagawea, because I'm kind of fascinated. I've always been fascinated with the American Indian culture, and now that we find all these other Indians out here of various kinds, I'm fascinated with the culture, and I just wanted to talk to her more about her tribe and her upbringing, and what in the world it really was that made her go off with these foolish American boys, and what was it really like out in the camp with them, and maybe she had some good recipes, I don't know.
I've always wanted to go have a beer with Haydn, because his music is just so immediate, and he is the epitome of an average guy who came from very humble beginnings and who worked his butt off, becoming one of the greatest musicians of the classical period, if not the father figure. Certainly, Mozart eclipsed him in terms of talent, but in terms of just lovely music that was really first-rate. Haydn, and so down to earth. His music is so charming and humorous and tuneful, and his string quartets are just amazing. So he was certainly every bit of the intellectual or an artist as anyone else, Mozart and Beethoven in particular, both of whom had great talent. He maybe didn't have the same kind of technical talent, the technical virtuosity that those two guys had, but his intellect and his artistry was amazing, I think. And a lot of it was self-made. He just kept working at it, and he got it really right. So I think he would love to have some good beer, and I'd be really happy to have a beer with him. And I'd be happy to have some wine with Jesus, and all I'd have to bring was some water. And then he could create some great wine, and everything would be good, so that'd be fun. I'd also like to have lunch with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I think that's how I say it. But he is pretty amazing for a young guy, and we need somebody amazing right now. We need somebody amazing.
Our backgrounds are very, very, very similar, because we both Greek scholars, Latin scholars, both involved in the Anglo-Saxon world and stuff like that. And you know his poetry. He broke every single rule in poetry that you could imagine before the modern times. And so he's Margaret, are you weeping over golden grove and leaving needless things you with your fresh thoughts to care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it'll come to such sights colder by and by, and spare a sigh. The world to one would leaf meal lie. Beginning of one of his poems. It's just wonderful. So we'd have good lunch.
That's a tough one, but I guess I'd probably say for me, David Oistrakh was always one of my favorites, and I still dig through whatever recordings I can find of his. He was just a violinist that just speaks to my soul. So I would love to have lunch with him and maybe just make him play for me. I'm just kidding. But speak about, what things were like back then and just the playing and the music. So.
Okay, is there anybody from the audience that has a question for anybody? Yes, sir.
When it comes to singing, can you train anyone to be a singer?
Good question. The majority of people can become better singers. Yeah. But some people lack the physical coordination of brain and body to, sometimes they're just lacking some of the innate skill you need to be able to sing. And those people, I bumped into a few of them over the years, and I'm talking, a long time. But they're out there, and they do have trouble improving. But most people do improve. Does that answer your question?
I'll keep working on it.
You want a teacher that knows about breath. Because like I said earlier, it's all about, we are a wind instrument here. And it's all about breath. If they want to talk about diction all the time or, other stuff, they're missing the point. Because
So it is all about breath.
It's all about how you move in that air. All right, we're a wind instrument, and it's all about the inhalation and the release. And if it's going to ring, it's going to be on the breath. Everything's going to be coordinated. And it's going to ring. It's going to fill the room.
I have a question for Jack.
Mm-hmm.
In almost all the spiritual traditions, breath is connected with spirit. And I know some group of people who get together and sing, they talk of hearing like a third voice may come in addition to the ones who are singing, and that there may be a kind of high or a change of state connected with breath work. Have you experienced that? Do you share?
The best breath, from a technical point of view, is similar to when we yawn, right? When we yawn, we're not crumpled over. We're usually like tired or something, and we know we need oxygen. So we pick ourselves up, and we drop our jaws, right? And we begin that process of opening everything up, right? As I've done like twice, I think, already tonight, because I was getting a little tired, right? It's dinner time, it's rest time. But that process of dropping the jaw, automatically the air goes low and fills our lobes. So you can all do it right now. Drop your jaw and breathe. Right? You don't want to see your shoulders moving. If your shoulders are moving, you're putting the air too high. What is up here? What's up here? What's this? Bone. Right? Do bones bend? No, bones break, right? What gives in our body is down here. The diaphragm descends, right? Just like those little medical machines, right? Right? The diaphragm goes down, and the lobes, lobe 1, lobe 2, fall, and they fill up with air. Right, so that's when we're yawning, we drop the jaw, we make space, and the air goes into our lungs. You're already on the way to singing a good high note, right? If you can get that kind of a breath without raising and the desperate breath here, the end of the 50-yard dash, right? You don't want that as a singer. You want this kind of a breath. There's a high note behind that breath, right? Ah, ah, right? When you get that low breath, it's gonna really ring. But you gotta get the low breath. So there's some simple things you have to do to get that breath. Being overly spiritual, most of us singers don't have time for that. You know, if there's a big high note coming up, guess what? You gotta plant yourself and go. You gotta fill up those lobes so that you can do the high note. I'm not hoping Jesus is helping me at that point. Or some spirit. It's like, do what you need to do. It's like Olga should be sitting there with her cataract glasses on saying, darling, get the better breath. Get the low breath. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question with my little humor thrown in? But it's all about just dropping your jaw and letting the breath go in. Americans kind of talk without opening their mouths frequently. They kind of talk like this, you know what I mean? And, everything's tight and closed. Open. Think like the British. We'll go back to England again with the long vowels. Or Italy, right? Right. Arrivederci. Right.
And with that, we will bring it to a close. Remind you all to yawn when you start your creative endeavors down the line. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. Please take some time to talk to the artist.